both very explicitly in the UN Millennium Declaration and also in the summit in 2005. And human rights are therefore both ends and means, desirable outcomes, so important tools for effecting change. Human rights advocates have sought to make the case that actions drawing on human rights are more moral appeals, because the values of human rights are embedded in a framework of law that has been negotiated and agreed by states. The framework makes governments accountable not just for protecting and promoting rights at home, but for ensuring their policies don't create or exacerbate injustices elsewhere. In addition, because human rights are explicitly focused on the individual, they emphasize empowerment and even of the most vulnerable and voiceless. For these reasons, the International Human Rights Agenda offers a new perspective on some of today's most urgent and seemingly intractable challenges. We in the human rights community have made the case, for example, that extreme poverty is almost always linked to the denial of fundamental rights, to housing, to education, to food, to safe water, as well as rights concerning participation in public decisions and equal treatment before the law. While traditional assistance aims to fill the gaps in public goods or basic services, a rights-based approach, as you know, assumes that poor people themselves can be agents of change, not simply objects of charity. It focuses on overcoming the barriers that prevent them from achieving their potential and enabling them to hold duty bearers accountable when established rights are denied. And I'm happy to say that there is tangible progress in moving the human rights and development debate forward. For example, at the OECD level, a report was commissioned, as I'm sure you know, from the Overseas Development Institute, ODI. They undertook a study on behalf of the OECD, which made a strong case for the relevance of human rights to the quality and success of development programming. It highlighted the ways that donors, each with different mandates, modes of engagement, are taking human rights more systematically into account. And it shows us that the key question is no longer whether human rights should be part of development efforts. They clearly already are. But operationalize the human rights approach. And today, the value and importance of human rights to development and good governance is more widely recognized. Human rights bring to these efforts an explicit and analytical framework grounded in an internationally agreed legal regime, and they focus on empowering individuals and communities and on upholding governments accountable for achieving development results. I participated earlier this year in April in a discussion held in Dublin, I'm very glad to say, good excuse to get back to Dublin, under the OECD DAC, on looking at the cross-cutting issues of the Paris Declaration on aid effectiveness, the environment, gender and human rights. And I was asked to give a keynote and decided, because of the work we're doing in realising rights on health, to focus on health as a way of looking at the fact that those cross-cutting issues are not marginal, they're absolutely central. And I'm quite glad to say that following that I was invited to an OECD DAC planning meeting in Paris, planning for the in Accra in September next year on the assent of the Paris Declaration. And I think a decision is more or less taken that health will be one of the key issues to be done in that context. And that centres gender, human rights, environmental considerations, and therefore I think hopefully will continue this process. There is another way in which you can look from a very human perspective at poverty. I just wanted to flag this. I'm sure you're aware, but I think it is another piece of how we get development that goes beyond development aid and looking at that way of tackling poverty. And I'm talking about the work of the Commission on Legal Empowerment of Work. There's been a mighty struggle in that commission, which is co-chaired by Hernando de Soto and Madeleine Albright. A mighty struggle about how to move the Fernandez de Soto into a broader sense of truly empowering the poor and truly providing access to the means of empowerment, to come out of the informal sector, to have access to justice and to the means to make changes. And I was very struck recently by, for me, a kind of living example of how you can empower poor people by precisely organising to take out of the entirely informal sector. I was in Ghana for a number of reasons, and I'd seen a presentation earlier of an ILO project on decent work in 2 districts in Ghana, which seemed to be showing good results. And I visited both districts, and I saw a simple and I think replicable model of organisation that was linked to the overall strategy of Ghana at the national level and its poverty reduction strategy and employment strategy. Also the local assembly was represented and local policy. The strategy was very rights-based, using human rights language and talking about the empowerment of local people, decent work, and how to participate. But the strategy was a relatively simple one, organising them into the hairdressers, the grass cutters. I asked what a grass cutter was. Probably most of you here know what a grass cutter is, but I didn't at the time. It looked like a large rat. Anyway, they're apparently very juicy to eat or something. But wood cutters, fishmongers, and so on. And the strategy was to organise associations, give some basic training, and then encourage them to join a credit union at the level where it was easy to join and participate. But before being able to join the credit union, they had to sign up to the health insurance system, and it had low rates of sign-up. So you had health taken out of the family risk. And I was really remarkably impressed by the influence it had on the people we talked to in both areas. They were road to changing the circumstances of their lives. The fishmongers were using the credit union to get a cold storage so that the fish could be preserved for longer. The hairdressers were doing this. The palm oil farmers had got to the next stage too and wanted to see if they could improve their quality to sell to Unilever. It was a really interesting context of the kind of legal empowerment that we're talking about in the Commission on legal empowerment of the poor. I want to turn briefly to situations of conflict and again make it a little bit personal. The other day there was a wide march publicly, as you'll recall, of the 2 years since the international community, the General Assembly, committed to responsibility to it, and a very accusing public demonstration of where are we. And I was part of an initiative to try in this century